Hello and welcome to the Mindful Productivity Podcast, the podcast where I interview founders and people in the productivity community. And in today's episode, I am lucky enough to have the founder of Sublime, Sari. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Daniel, so much for having me. Excited to be here.
I have prepared a few questions. We are going to talk about everything from Sari herself, all the way to Sublime and the philosophy behind it. But we can start off by allowing you to introduce yourself. And with that, I also want to ask the first question. How would you describe yourself?
First of all, I'll say this is a very, very hard question. I ask myself all the time, like, who am I? Because I think that I contain multitudes, so it's really hard to answer that. But uh, I found a description of someone, and I was like, wow, that describes me too. And it was Stuart Brand, who's the founder of Whole Earth Catalog, which is a beautiful media publication from many decades ago. And he said, I find things and I found things. And I think that's so me, because my life is about finding ideas, possibilities, reading books, concepts, and then also making things, building things. And so there's the thinker in me that's finding things and dreaming, and then there's the doer in me that's building things and making things. And so, yeah, I just think that kind of like strikes that balance of I think I have like my head in the clouds and my feet on the ground, and that sort of like reflects who I am. And yeah, I think obviously like people know me these days as either writer because I've been writing on Substack for a while, or a founder because they know me as the founder of Sublime. But yeah, I think that really I don't identify as like a typical software founder or a typical content creator. I think I'm this like weird mix of things that is just a reflection of my beliefs. Like I really believe that our job here in this world is to acquire knowledge and then share it. That one of the most underutilized resources we have is the time we spend uninspired. And so I'm just like very driven by making an impact in a lot of these kind of big picture ways, but also I'm very interested in like the practical reality of grounding things. So it's, I guess, that balance is the thing that I'm always kind of seeking, and that pursuit, I guess, defines me.
And you talked about being a writer. How did you get into writing?
It's interesting. I never thought of myself as a writer. In fact, I was born and raised in Bogota, Colombia. I moved to the US where English was my second language. I didn't have the confidence to really write in English, but I started in 2019, which is a while ago. I started a Substack, and at the time, it was just an outlet for curation. I was not writing my own original thoughts or ideas. It was just me curating things. I just wanted an outlet for curation. And I always tell people that when you transition from consumption to curation, inevitably that devolves into creation. Because when you're collecting and connecting ideas, then you'll naturally be engaging with them in a way that's far deeper and have your own point of view and kind of want to spark that. So I think my journey to writing was really just a natural kind of progression of just going from consumption to curation, and then naturally I end up in the creation seat.
And I've read a few of the things you've written. One of the fun parts of having a podcast and having guests on is that you have to stalk all of your guests to find questions. So I have read a few things, and we will get back to that later. But as you said, you write, you run a company, and you have children. How do you stay productive?
I knew you would ask this. Um, and I wish I had incredible productivity advice, but the reality is that I think the best productivity advice for me is having intrinsic motivation. Like there's just like nothing beats liking what you're doing. I just have so much energy. I'm so energized by the mission and how much there is to do that that just like sustains me and fuels me. And I don't really have like complicated productivity systems. I mean, I do make a lot of lists. I think like I make a lot. Like my day starts with making lists, and I have like I have like lists everywhere. And that's like a huge kind of life hack, I think. But the lists don't have to be in any kind of sophisticated system or anything. It's just lists. Um, and then, yeah, I mean, I've written in the past about how I think it's the end of productivity and that we're going to shift to a creativity mindset. But I think, the reality is a little bit more nuanced, obviously. And I think a big kind of cheat sheet for me has been having a knowledge library that like basically like is a cheat code for my creativity and hence makes me more productive, but in creative ways, which is the ways in which I want to kind of live my life and show up um, in the world. So yeah, I mean, I don't know that I'm like the most productive person in the world. In fact, like one of the one of my most deeply held beliefs is that the best things in life take time, that it's just better to make something incredible than it is to make something fast. So I'm not really trying to optimize for speed that much in my life. But like you said, I have three children and a company and a team. And so I think, make a lot of lists.
Yeah. It helps to make the lists, especially if you're able to cross off everything as well, then you are pretty much being productive. But you mentioned something that I want to dig a little deeper into because you said that you have written about the end of productivity and the start of creativity. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think essentially, if you think about where we are in history, like the Industrial Revolution, uh, if you think about it, it was all about like doing more faster. Like essentially creating more output was what made us like yeah, show our prominence as a species, our relative kind of status and prominence. And so I understand why somebody that's prolific, that's, churning a lot of content or, making like more things faster, like that was a, there was a scarcity in that. It wasn't easy to do that. But I think now we're witnessing a massive shift where it's easier than ever, basically, to create something. And certainly, like, to create something that's already been done before has been commoditized. And I think people are just going to be like essentially when something becomes abundant, then the question to ask is what is the new scarcity? And I think it's becoming like, with generative AI, like anyone can start a podcast. Can somebody start a podcast where they'll go really deep? Well, they'll be able to ask the real questions. Well, they'll get to the heart of something. Well, they'll develop relationships so deep with their guests that they'll go to places that their guests haven't been to before. And so I think to me, those are the more interesting questions because they're less about can I do more faster and more about can I do something that's never been done before. And I think that there's like the economic necessity of that in the sense that, if you try, like, you can be trapped in this like commodity hamster wheel if you try to do what everyone else can easily do by prompting ChatGPT, or you can spend a little bit longer and do things that only you can do. And I just think that, life is going to be a lot more fulfilling if we optimize for creativity. Because I think we talk a lot about the ways in which AI feels human, but we don't talk enough about the ways in which humans have acted like robots, basically, for the past couple of decades. But we're not robots. Like our competitive advantage lies in like the ways in which we connect ideas and our taste and how we direct our attention. And so I just think that of course there are some things in life where I just need a list. I need to call my kid's dentist. I need to like respond to this email. But there's a lot of things that there is no list, there is no process. It's just like wandering and sitting with the ideas until you have a breakthrough. And I guess like that is so much of the spirit of Sublime and what I believe will be valuable.
Because now we've talked a little bit about your philosophy on the world, and I think that is important when I get to interview founders because it speaks to what they want their app to be. And that brings me to my next question. What is the vision for Sublime and how did you develop that vision?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say it was like a napkin idea where like everything happened in an instant, but the reality is it hasn't unfolded over years. But the dream really the dream never started as a build a better personal knowledge management system or build a better Evernote. It was never about that. It was always, I was always in search of a feeling on the internet. And I think that the initial kind of spark for me was as I was observing the internet and how I used it, there were these solo tools that I was using, whether it was Notion or Apple Notes or Roam, or, I've kind of used them all over the years. And I was doing a lot of kind of focused, intentional work. I fell down the building a second brain rabbit hole, and I was doing a lot of kind of like interesting thinking and curating in my own kind of personal spaces. And then I thought about how do I engage in social spaces. And those spaces felt very much like broadcasting, like I was yelling to people for attention, like it was all like about getting likes and performance. And I thought, why am I spending like hours and hours of my life laboring away in these solo knowledge tools when we could combine the focus and intentionality of a tool for me with the sense of aliveness and serendipity of a tool where other people are there. So that was kind of the initial kind of question that set me on this path of how can we kind of combine the solitary with the communal. How can we, if you think about a coffee shop is a place where you're gonna further your intentions, you're with your laptop, you're doing your own thing, but you're getting inspiration from kind of the fact that other people are around you. And so I just became enamored with this question of how can we manifest this vision in a tangible way. And then a personal knowledge management tool is where really that kind of dream met the ground, right? Of let's build a knowledge tool where you can collect and connect ideas privately or publicly, but really like the core mechanic that we kind of figured out is what made the product like sticky and retentive is that you could put in a thought or idea, whether it was a link, a highlight, and you can immediately discover 100 more from other people. So instead of me, thinking about, I don't know, how attention and scrolling corrupts our minds, I can save a thought about that and immediately fall down a very intentional kind of rabbit hole of not just my own ideas, but other people's. And that felt very unique, I think, especially in a world where on social media, we're scrolling and it's, some post about politics, some post about somebody's cat dying, some post about a war somewhere. It's like, our minds are just not engineered to handle like this kind of context shifting. And so Sublime is just about deepening your intention in ways that are equal parts kind of personal and communal. So I don't know if that answers your question, but the vision is more about a feeling. How can we create an internet that feels sublime? And when we think about sublime, because sublime is a very abstract term, but we've come up with a couple of principles that actually define what it means for the internet to be sublime. One is intention over attention. So Sublime is not engineered to have you kind of be scrolling and capturing your attention. It's about deepening your intention. When you put in a thought or idea on Sublime, we take you deeper down that path. We help you kind of harness that like focus in more kind of like serendipitous ways. The other is creativity over productivity, which we've talked about. It's really about making something wonderful over making something fast and acknowledging that anything that you're going to make that's wonderful starts with collecting a lot of ideas and raw material. And then there's this concept of we over me. For us, the sublime internet has to find like the most interesting things we do in the world are things we do with other people. So for me, the aspect of Sublime not being just a solo knowledge tool was really important. So as you can tell, there's a lot of kind of philosophy in it, but we really try to operate with our head in the clouds and feet on the ground.
And that sort of brings me to my next question, because like you talked about going deep into the rabbit hole of one idea, but couldn't you, for example, just do a Google search or use one of the already existing personal knowledge management applications? Like, we have so many of them. Why should Sublime exist?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, let's think about what Sublime enables that you cannot do on Google, or in any of these various knowledge management tools. So I'll give you an example. Right now, I'm writing the manifesto for Sublime because we're rebuilding our landing page. So I have some ideas that I have collected on my Sublime library, but I want more. I'm in the kind of like phase where I'm collecting a lot of raw material before I synthesize that all. On if I were to go into Google search, it's going to give me all sorts of SEO optimized results. So Google is not going to give me. Google is great at a lot of things, to be clear, and Sublime is not great at a lot of the things that Google is great at. But if I wanted to paste a highlight from a book that I read. Say I read the book, I don't know, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, to give you an example. And I had one of those highlights saved to my Sublime library, and I thought one of those highlights was a very profound idea. And I wanted to go deeper into that idea. If I search on Google, it's going to be SEO manufactured junk, a lot of listicles. If I search on Sublime, it's going to show me specific sentences or non-obvious images from all corners and edges of the internet, some buried Substack, but all human curated. So it's just a very different corpus of content than you would get in the SEO optimized world. I think that for some queries, where should I, like, what are some great, like, kid-friendly restaurants in so-and-so city, Google's going to be great. But for some queries, I'm going deep into trying to understand the future of media. I want to see what the non-obvious, like, interesting thinkers and insights, and a lot of that kind of subjective knowledge is being indexed and curated by an incredible community of people on Sublime. And so I think that's kind of the different, I think the dream of, like, organizing the world's information on Google actually became, like, to build an advertising engine that is, about SEO optimization and whatnot. And then if you think about what Sublime enables relative to something like Apple Notes, this is where it gets really interesting. If you have say you're a consultant and you are doing a presentation for a brand about how, brands in the future need to be co-built with their communities, or you have some sort of thesis around that. You, in Apple Notes, you could start a new note and start dumping things that you find online. On Sublime, you can do exactly the same thing, but as you add some of those things, it's going to feed you inspiration and ideas from the Sublime community. And I just obviously am extremely biased, but I think they're really good. And I guess it's, because I like the indie internet. I like the interesting kind of thinkers and writers that are not, SEO optimizing their stuff. And so I just think the quality of the insights that you're going to find and the quality of the curation is just very different than the hyper optimized web, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I have so many questions around Sublime because it is, as you said, different from many of the other, like, note-taking productivity applications I often test out. And you talked about going deep down into the rabbit hole and finding out what other people are thinking about the thing you're writing about, your thesis, but that requires people to actually curate inside of the application. So what is the value for someone to actually do that?
Yeah. So I think we think about the promise of Sublime as mainly three things. One is the typical never lose a valuable idea. So yes, some people are using Notion or Evernote or Raindrop, but the vast majority of people that come to us, they've tried everything and nothing sticks because everything is too complicated. Because a tool like Notion lets you do everything, but it's not particularly good at any one thing. And so Sublime is like our single purpose is to help you build a knowledge library of everything interesting you come across. That's it. We're not trying to build a project management tool, a CRM tool. It's just one thing. Help you save anything from anywhere. And so I think that I don't think there are a lot of tools that let you do this in a way that is multimedia, um, and with the ease of a browser extension, of mobile, of web, and specifically, I think that we've made some decisions, like very intentional but nuanced product decisions around how the capture experience works. So the way highlights get captured on Sublime, and the way we treat like highlights as an atomic unit that's still connected to its parent. It works for some brains, not all of them, but it's the way that it works for me. So I think that the first value proposition is save anything from anywhere. And of course, there are other tools that do that. I would argue that for a vast majority of people, especially people who prioritize simplicity, none of those tools are good enough. The second one is never be uninspired. So I think that that's where the communal piece comes in, right? It's not just if you go into your Apple Notes and paste a quote that you saw online that you want to return to, in your Apple Notes, it's just that one quote that will connect dust. In Sublime, it multiplies because it connects to all sorts of different people. And then one day you'll get a notification that says, hey, Daniel added this quote to his collection of, thoughts to wake up to. And then you'll fall down that rabbit hole. And so there is just this, I really truly believe that for the people that have adopted Sublime as a tool, they're operating in this world in a way that is far more inspired than the average person. And then the third piece is that I think a lot of productivity tools are really geared around collecting ideas. And Sublime is really about doing something with those ideas. So it's not enough to just collect ideas. It's about collecting ideas, connecting ideas, and creating with those ideas. And so some of the things that we do to enable that is, for example, we've built an integration with Google Docs such that as I'm typing in Google Docs, when I'm writing my Substack every week, I can pull up into my Google Docs related ideas from my Sublime library. So these related ideas follow me into my context for writing. We've also built a Canvas tool similar to Figma or Miro, where as you are, if you have a collection of ideas on Sublime, once you're ready to actually do something with them, you have a space to actually kind of like tinker with them and do more than just have like a static repository or library. So I think that we're kind of like 1% of the way there in terms of that vision, but really we believe that the kind of plague of our generation is that people are essentially like in passive consumption mode. And we want to pull millions of people out of passive consumption mode so that they can go from passive consumption to mindful curation and then creation. So it really, I think Sublime is a lot more oriented around creativity and creation and connecting ideas than your typical kind of like, basic bookmarking software tool.
And the last point there, you're talking about getting millions of people into curation and then creation. But in order to do that, these tools have to become mainstream. Even though we have this podcast right now and people will probably listen to it, like PKM tools is just a small part of the internet. Most people won't use tools like Obsidian or even Rome or things like that. Has there been any thought behind keeping the simplicity and making Sublime more of like mainstream tool in the future?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think you're absolutely right. First of all, like PKM is a tiny niche. I think it's partially a tiny niche because the tools that are out there today don't speak to most people. Like normal people don't want to double bracket the internet. Normal people don't want to use a tool that looks like an airplane cockpit of features. Like I really think that for us, like simplicity, and we all like our North Star is building a tool that feels like a yoga studio, not an airplane cockpit. So I do think part of the reason PKM has not gone mainstream is because I don't think there's been a tool that is simple enough that it will speak to more of a mainstream audience. I think personally, because of the makeup of our team and the fact that we're not just like, we're not a team of like software engineers. We're a team of creators building the dream tool we wish we had. I think we have more of a shot of building a tool that can resonate with a more kind of mainstream audience. That said, I do like my personal goal is to ensure that Sublime has longevity at whatever scale that makes sense. So whether it's 100,000 people paying for and using Sublime or millions, I care less about that than the fact that I just want to build something that is meaningful for the people it serves, that is sustainable. So I think that, a lot of kind of VC type plays launch with a big vision and then they shut down because it's very hard to build something mainstream. I'm not married to any sense of scale. I want this to be sustainable. I already see how Sublime has become such an important part of the lives of so many of the creatives and thinkers that we serve. And my responsibility is to make sure that I steward the business so that it can be around. And I do think that if we do our job well, that this has the opportunity to serve millions of people, because the reality is that, like, our memories are so fragile. We are all spending so much time consuming content. And I mean, everyone, whether it's like, we're all creators. It's not just, am I going to create an article or write an essay on Substack? It's, what shape am I going to give a conversation this afternoon? That act is based on you consuming a lot of ideas and connecting them and synthesizing them. And so in some ways, I always tell our team that we've always struggled to position ourselves as like being a part of the category of PKM or productivity or second brain or, digital library. Like, I want to make a Sublime library a thing. I want a Sublime library to be a category of its own, where, like in the same way that people ask you, do you have an Instagram? It's like, do you have a Sublime library? Because that, there's just like, there's something on the, like, I really don't have a lot of places on the internet where for the vast majority of people, you could see how they think, who they are, what they're consuming. And I think we have a shot at making that happen. But, regardless of the scale in which we achieve this vision, I am just committed to making like the company just focused on longevity first and foremost.
That is a really important thing, especially for people around my audience. I've heard horror stories of people losing all of their notes and having to rebuild all over again. But I wanted to talk about another point, which you mentioned a little bit with Google and the SEO content that you find all over Google. Because you have previously written and talked about that, the fact that there is something wrong with the internet today. And what do you think is wrong with the internet as it is today?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing I'll say is that I think the internet is amazing. I think the world is far better with the internet than without it. I know some people disagree with this, but I just want to set the record straight that I think the internet is amazing. And every day when I use Claude or ChatGPT, I think to myself, this is like the most incredible time to be alive. Even Twitter, like, for all of its faults, the reason I'm building Sublime is based off of all of the relationships I've built on Twitter, people that I've met that have supported us, that have invested in us. So there's so much incredible stuff that the internet has enabled. But there's also a lot of problems and opportunities. And we are very early on in creating the internet. And so I think the biggest problem with the internet is that we've effectively delegated our attention to the world's largest advertising companies, right? So I think, and I think we are underestimating the harms of scrolling. And, I don't think like screens are universally bad, not at all. I think like they're amazing. But I think that the act of scrolling and spending like hours, I think the average person spends 6-8 hours a day just like ingesting, processing, and responding to just like an insane amount, just a fire hose of ideas. It just means that we are far less focused on deepening our intentions and like furthering on the causes that we really care about, and more interested in just like, it's like nobody benefits from you scrolling a feed for hours and feeling sad about the state of the world and not being able to do anything about it. So like, pick a thing that is your kind of your thing in life. Like my thing is like building Sublime and like go deep and focus on that. Create a playbook for a different type of software company. Like what is it that you can do and go deep on that? And I just think that the internet is really like right now, all of the incentives on the internet are designed for distraction. We like basically like the dream of infinite knowledge became the reality of infinite scrolling. It's just and it's a digital casino. And so I don't think this is all bad. I think what the kind of the thing I've come around to is like a good analogy is a city. If you think about a city, like if you go to New York City, sure, like maybe you'll go to Times Square for a bit and, like go into like see the chaos and like, everyone like clamoring for attention and there's all sorts of like performances and stuff. But maybe in the afternoon, you'll go to a coffee shop, you know, then maybe you'll walk around the West Village. There's like different kind of settings for different kind of like for a different kind of energy. And I think that's just so much of the internet feels like times like the vast majority of our time on the internet is like it's the equivalent of like spending most of our time in Times Square instead of like at the coffee shop. Or it's like you're either alone in your house or you're in Times Square. But like no, like if you think about a city, there's different kinds of places with different kind of wavelengths and rhythms and vibes. And so I just think that we need more diversity in terms of like the kinds of like digital architectures that we are making possible. And I think I once heard Ev Williams, the founder of Twitter, say something that I think very much resonated, which is if you think about agriculture, agriculture was an incredible invention. It got a lot of people fed. It was very productive. But it also made a lot of people obese. It made a lot of people more unhealthy. And as a result, we saw the rise of like organic foods and like, all of this kind of movement towards like clean eating and stuff. And I think the same is true of the internet. Like the kind of like mass industrialized internet, it's done a lot of things. Like more people have access and all of that stuff. But it also has meant that like, our attention has been compromised. And so yeah, I just think Sublime is part of that like movement towards like that like more organic web.
So, except from Sublime, how do you think we fix that issue?
Listen, I think that we cannot outsource our agency to software. Like the reality is that if I spend 6 hours of my day scrolling on Twitter, I cannot just blame Twitter. We have to take personal responsibility for how we spend our time. So even though the software that that we are building at Sublime is designed with a set of principles and philosophies to encourage like good kind of use of the internet to really kind of honor your time and attention, I think ultimately like the more we understand and educate people on these challenges and give people the agency to solve them, the better. Because I think it's like a cop out to say like, oh, this, let's just complain about Facebook or whatever. Like we have to take like our own kind of personal responsibility. And yeah, I think the other kind of thing that I suspect will happen is with AI, there's going to be such a just fire hose of content that I think we're going to go back to like more kind of ancient forms of trust, if that makes sense. I think that people are just going to trust a lot of what they see online far less. So I don't know. I don't have a lot of predictions other than it's a very interesting time because a lot stands to change.
It does, and you mentioned AI, and at this point, I think we have AI in almost every single application. But what is the philosophy around AI in Sublime?
Yeah, I mean, so the way I think about AI is like I don't think about like, oh, there is AI, how do we use it? I think about here is what we want to build. In what ways can we use the best technologies available to us to build that thing? So for example, if you think about PKM tools, one of the reasons I think the return, the ROI, the return of investment on spending a lot of time collecting ideas hasn't been super great in the past is because you would maybe collect a bunch of stuff, put it on Evernote, but then you wouldn't find it again. It was very hard to find. So I think like that's a perfect example of how semantic search and smart search with AI can create a 10x better user experience in PKM tools. So that's a great example of how we use AI on Sublime. Is our search is incredible because we use AI search. The other thing we want to do is like, because we really care about related ideas, connecting ideas, like serendipitous discoveries, then we use AI to generate embeddings and find those similarities between an idea that you posted and somebody else's idea. So that's 100% AI powered. And I think in many ways that was like, that's like the dream of like the early kind of Rome days. Like so many of the things that I think people that have been thinking about knowledge tools for years wish they could do are now possible with an API call. So that's another thing that is very possible. So I think in general, we think a lot about AI not as a companion. So how, instead of generating the content for you, how can it assist you? So we have different kind of metaphors that we use for how we want to integrate with AI, but it never starts with like, we have AI, what do we do with it? It always starts with, what do we want to do? And then how do we use the best possible technologies to help us build the best possible user experience? I'm happy to give your audience some alpha in terms of something we're launching next that is, I think, a very clever and unique use of AI. So I'm happy to spill the beans.
I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, so if you think about Sublime, the kind of like basic value proposition is save anything from anywhere. But as you, I'm sure know, a lot of knowledge is trapped in podcasts, in audio formats. And so there's all sorts of different tools where you can take a podcast and generate a transcript and then highlight that transcript. And there's a lot of ways to do that. And they're all kind of complicated and time consuming. But we've effectively figured out a way using AI to be able to listen to a podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening, then take a screenshot of that, of the podcast player screen as you're listening. And then we convert that screenshot into a transcript and like audio clip of the moment you were just listening to.
Yeah, that is something I know a lot of people in my audience, me included, would love to see, because I've tried many different applications, but none of them has actually worked for podcast listening. But that brings me like to back to the question of what is the point of like consuming all of this information and curating it, or curating all of this information. It is in the end to create something. Where does Sublime stand in that creation phase?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, listen, I think the point of this stuff is, I think I think everyone has an answer to that. It's a very personal answer. I'll tell you why I curate. I curate because it helps me pay attention to the world more closely. When I have a repository of interesting things, when I have containers and collections of things that I'm nurturing, I just become a magnet for interesting ideas. So regardless of whether I create with them, it makes me engage with the world more deeply. So that in itself is one of the reasons why I curate. It just makes me more aware of the world. The second reason is because my memory is completely fragile, and there will be many times when a friend will tell me something like, I don't know, like some complaint about parenting, and I'm like, I read this book about something about parenting, and the fact that I have this cheat code in life, which is like I can always pull up that exact insight from my Sublime library at the right time. It's just served me in countless ways in my life, and I think like God every day. Like I'm obsessed with the fact that I have this library. It's just has like proven time and time again to be a gold mine. But I think that to your question about creation, I do think that we are all spending hours and years really consuming content. And I think the years we spend in an endless consumption loop mean nothing if we can't use that information to share it, to inspire other people, to create something novel with it. It really goes back to like what I think the point of life is. I think the point of life is to acquire knowledge and then share it. And so I think whether you're curating just to share it or whether you're curating to synthesize that into new forms of knowledge, like there's so many reasons why people would do this. I personally do feel passionate, especially because I've seen how incredible it feels to be a creator instead of a passive consumer. So I do personally like feel very called towards helping more people create stuff. And I think that, the path to creation starts with like you need a container for those ideas. Like the moment that in a very kind of metaphorical way, the moment I create a collection on Sublime and I start filling it with raw material, like it's the act of creating a collection. That first step is such a meaningful step in terms of creating something. And yeah, I'm just like very interested in helping more people create. And I think the more we give people environments where they feel inspired and where they can deepen their intentions, the more likely that is. Even though, of course, like there's so much more to creation than just that.
And like you said, it is an incredible feeling being a creator and creating things. Why would you say that that feeling is so incredible?
It's such a great question. I think that if you think about what makes people happy, like I don't know, this question kind of takes me down I've met like plenty of like extremely wealthy people, some billionaires that are not happy because they've kind of like they're retired. Like a retired, I've met plenty of like retired billionaires that are not happy because they don't feel useful. And I think that feeling useful, like that is just such a magical feeling. And when you put something out there that has like your authenticity, your DNA, that is adding to this like constellation of like humanity and like each of us like adding our own footprint to the world, like we just feel like we matter, like and we made our mark in the world. So I think it's like both like it's like an equally kind of selfish and selfless act where we need it to feel like we matter. But it's also like this deeply selfless thing of like letting yourself be known and expressing yourself. And I don't know, in some ways, like I really think that the most that we should be doing in life only the things that like only we can do. Like like you should not leave the world without having done the thing that only you can do. Like maybe there's nobody that's going to be as passionate about productivity and mindful productivity in the exact way that you, Daniel, are. And I just think if that is true, then you should not leave the world without having done that. And I think that, Sublime, it might be like a crazy idea to have a vision for a more sublime internet, but I genuinely think that it's like the combination of all of my experiences and beliefs that make me uniquely equipped to bring this idea to life in the way that only I can bring it to life. Of course, there's many different ways of bringing something similar to it to life, but I think that we have a responsibility to make the things that only we can make.
To start, and I really agree with everything you say, but to start to wrap this up a little bit, I wanted to bring it back to the idea of sublime because there are uh, at least a few questions. One big one that I get every time I talk about sublime, and that is the idea of a shared knowledge graph. Because in the productivity and the PKM space, people want to own their notes, like going towards applications like Obsidian, like Logsec, because they want to own their notes. What is the thought process behind note ownership inside of a shared knowledge graph like Sublime?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, it's a loaded question. So I'll start with a couple things. So I think when people say like people want to own their notes, there's kind of degrees of ownership, right? So, in the Obsidian world, like local files, end-to-end encryption, like Sublime is not for people who care about that stuff. We're not storing like nuclear codes here. We're storing ideas. Like, it's just, it's not really designed for people who like like I think there's a small niche of people on the web that like that is like the single thing they care about the most. That is our value proposition. So if that is the single thing you care about most, Sublime is not for you. That said, we 100% believe that you should, like, your library on Sublime, like my library on Sublime is like my most valuable asset. It has like all of my knowledge, my history, everything I've consumed, everything that has resonated. If I lost that, it would be like losing a child. So so first of all, like we allow export to CSV, to zip file. Like we are making we have no kind of desire or intention to trap you into Sublime. We want to make you feel like you always, like those ideas are yours and are exportable. I think you also asked a question of like, how does it work in a shared knowledge graph? So if you think about Sublime, the building blocks of Sublime are cards and collections, right? So you add cards to your library, you create collections that are in your library. They can be private or public. And so everything that you add to your library is yours and exportable. Now, what's interesting on Sublime is that maybe you visit my library and you see a card in my library that you really like, and you add it to your library. So who owns that card or note? And I think in that sense, it's like we operate like a Pinterest, in the sense that it's not like if you think about Sublime is not like a tweet where I tweet something and the tweet is from my account and then people retweet from my account. It's more like I share a link and then, oh, Daniel also shared that link. And, that link can live in many different libraries. But when I think the important thing I think for your audience to know is that as we think about building Sublime, what like the main thing that we think about is like really gracefully straddling that balance between Sublime having extreme single player utility, meaning like we are as valuable and as useful as, I would say like a tool like My Mind or Raindrop or whatever. Like, I mean, I like a lot of our users say that it's like a much better for many different ways. But it's the communal and the social and the shared stuff. It's like a cherry on top, but it doesn't detract from your own personal utility. So you could do everything privately. You could export everything. So really, like the fact that that there is this kind of communal discovery piece, it is not a like practically speaking a detractor in any sense. It's just a cherry on top. It means that you can discover other people's ideas, bring them to your library. It means that you can see ideas related to yours, add them to your collection if you'd like. We really are thinking about like single player utility first and foremost. Like people are using Sublime as their knowledge tool of choice. They're trusting us, they're paying us. So we really kind of intend to kind of honor and respect that by delivering that utility with encryption, like all of that stuff aside, which is not really where we play.
So, last question, and this is going to be a hard one. At least I think it will be. Where do you see Sublime in 3 years, and how do you think you will get there?
Listen, I think we are 1% of the way there in terms of where our vision is, right? Like our single biggest challenge is that, we get a lot of feedback and we have a lot of ideas, and ideas take time to build. So I think in terms of where we see it in 3 years, I think we're just going to have a much better product, a much bigger community, and a business that is just going to be much better known amongst our target audience and circles. I think that in terms of like, I think I said something earlier, but I'll say that again in this context. Like, I genuinely think it's probably going to take us more than 3 years. It definitely will. But I genuinely think that a Sublime library will take on its own meaning. So probably not 3 years, but I think, over the next like 5 years, definitely 10, people are going to be talking about a Sublime library in the same way that people talk about a second brain. And in terms of how we get there are no shortcuts. You show up every day, you make the product 1% better, how you talk about it 1% better. It's like step by step. I think in the immediate term, we're launching publicly. So we have been in private beta for over a year, and basically everyone using Sublime today has either paid for it or has applied and been let off the want list. For the first time in about 2 months, we're going to let, less than 2 months actually, we're going to let anyone experience Sublime. And so that's, it's, I know where we want to be in 10 years, but really day to day, it's like one foot in front of the other. And right now, my single focus is in really preparing for and orchestrating a beautiful public launch that I think does justice to the kind of the product and the values behind the product.
I'm really excited for the public launch. I've been playing around with Sublime for a few weeks now, and I think as we are recording this, my video on it is getting published. But if someone wanted to get in touch with you, maybe they have feedback about the product, where is the best way to get in touch with you?
First of all, I love getting feedback. I love getting emails. I have onboarded personally more than 1,000 people on video calls. So don't hesitate to send me emails. I'm at sari@sublime.app. I'm also active on Twitter at sariazut. I'm active on Substack. We have a pretty active Sublime publication there. And yeah, I mean, a friend of Daniel's is a friend of ours. So we'll definitely give your community early access to Sublime before our launch. And we will take all of the constructive feedback that we can get.
And I will leave all of those links and the email down below so you can check them out. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. It was really, really fun.
Thank you, Daniel. It was really fun. And yeah, again, thank you for amplifying our work and showcasing us.
And thank you to those of you who have listened to this. As usual, if you haven't done so already, please do follow and subscribe. And I hope to see you again quite soon.